Welcome to a brand new wave, drowning out the noise it's tame. Liberty whispers through the brave, breaking free from every chain. Nullify the rules they crave, crypto beats that pave the way. Anarchy with minds that's safe, algorithms new dawn today. Out of bounds and out of sight, building futures pure and bright. Escape the grip and win the fight. Welcome into the legacy ride. Beyond control we take a stand, casting off the iron brand. Freedom flowing through our hands, revolution's our command. Decentralize the way we plan, all together we expand. Breaking shackles for the clan, in this journey we're unpanned. Out of bounds and out of sight, building futures pure and bright. Escape the grip and win the fight. Welcome into the legacy ride.
I can't see him.
Can't see me, man. Can't see me at
Oh,
all.
there he is.
Heaven to adore and be adored by God.
He's given himself to God, and you should too.
Yeah. So welcome in, everybody. Nobody's here live yet, so that means that you can take your shirt off there, Andrew.
Chicken tendies. That's right.
Welcome
You can
in,
see where our
everybody.
loyalties lie.
Yeah. You're supposed to be abstinent from meat, but whatever. I don't blame you. But welcome in, everybody, to the Legacy Right. Another edition of Silver Linings, the 10th episode of season 3. And we got Andrew Joseph in all of his bald proudness. And you have
Very
me.
proud.
And I haven't done this in a while, but I am the legacy of Jennifer Kaiser. I am Zach Kaiser. You may call me Augustine. That is my namesake, because I think so much that I want to rest. And I want to rest so much, and I want to have so much time that I even wrote a book that gives you the inspiration on the emphasis of what time really means when you have endless time in eternity. Good book, by the way. It's called City of God.
If you want to know what my namesake is, Google Andrew Joseph IRS.
Actually, what are you talking about? Google, this isn't going to get us canceled before we're even big, or is it?
Well, you know,
go ahead and talk.
It'll get canceled, but not in the way you're expecting.
Was this like some guy that went postal at an IRS facility or something?
What are you talking about? No, it just went on a nice little flight. He's the Sky King before Sky King was a thing. Check out that episode. It was a good episode.
Oh, so was that when... So what you're saying is your namesake is somebody that flew a biplane into an IRS building.
I'm not implying that. That's why I'm saying Google it.
If you want to know more about Andrew Joseph, this Andrew Joseph, just type in Andrew Joseph in Google IRS. What happened at the IRS with Andrew Joseph? Make it a question. But I guess since we got two tuning in now. Welcome everybody. Sponsor ad plug. It's us. It's ourselves. If you enjoy our content, whether you watch live, whether you watch not live on replay, whether you like the podcast sphere, share it, like it, subscribe it on YouTube, follow us all across wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, you name it. Give us a review if you'd like. But if you'd like to become a sponsor, help us do this more frequently with better content, maybe get some better guests, maybe have some better conversations, and just all out try to make this thing better for you, the listener and the viewer. You can go down, PayPal link right there. You can become a sponsor and support any amount that you want to choose. Hell, if you really wanted to, you could really just, you could be like, well, fuck this guy and donate $0.00. I'm sure you can probably do it on PayPal. That would be funny. Sort of like how DoorDash does it. Andrew knows this.
Right. All too well.
Yeah, where nobody tips because they're given the option
Right.
of tipping $0. But
Yeah.
but yeah,
Oh,
if
okay.
you'd like,
Cash at the door. Yeah, right.
yeah, that's the other option. But if you would like to become a sponsor and help support the Legacy Ride and Silver Linings, as well as my ministry series, Illogical Theology Podcast on Spotify and Substack, actually, you can head to that PayPal link down at the bottom, and wada boom, wada bang, you help support two young lads just trying to make a name for themselves. Not really. I don't want to make a name for myself. I just want to have a great conversation, have a good time. Andrew wants to be famous, though.
Oh man, or infamous. One of the two. Just look at the IRS.
I mean, go Google the IRS. Yeah, you might want to be. There's some infamy. There is some infamy. But to transition formally, welcome into the Legacy Ride,
Yeah.
everybody. Yeah, the topic at hand today, and I promise you, it's going to seem like there might not be a silver lining, especially to you libertarians out there that watch this. But rights only by force. Do rights actually exist, Andrew?
It's a construct, an abstraction.
It is.
If you
It is a such a.
if
It
you
is a
ask
social
Max
construct.
Stirner, he says, property doesn't exist, but it can only be enforced by force. So
If you ask Max Stirner, yeah. If you ask me, I would take the same stance egoistically. As an egoist, I would say the same thing, but as a Thomist, I would think more reasonable within my faith and say the biggest ego of them all is God, and everything is God's, and we are here as his creatures to steward the land. So nothing is real and nothing is permitted, by the way.
yeah.
I mean, lots of
Let
things
me
are permitted. Your free will is permitted. You can go, and if you want to choose to do debaucherous things, by all means, that's your soul.
Yeah. Let me rephrase, actually clean up that because it wasn't very clean. He says property doesn't exist, but theft is only
It
possible
doesn't.
through property.
Yeah,
So-
theft is only possible through property, and the only way that property exists is through a legality, which means institutions typically have to be
Framework.
formalized. Society, the
A
society
framework,
is
a consensus.
well, I was getting to that, Andrew. The society is the framework. The institutions are built upon the framework of the society, and the constructs of your rights are created by those institutions that, in fact, enforce those said rights through force and violence, or the threat of that force and violence. Meaning
And actually-
that obviously we're going to allow institutions per se to work, right, through contract, through mediators, through courts, etc. And so that is where you alleviate the necessity for force and violence. But there's always that last resort, and that's the only way that you can enforce any type of right. What is your natural right there,
And
Andrew?
well, actually, Lysander Spoon's got a quote here from that, and it says, "All legitimate government is a mutual insurance company." This is obviously Spooner in the 1800s, voluntarily agreed upon by the parties to it for the protection of the rights against wrongdoers. If it is, and its voluntary character is precisely as similar an association for mutual protection against fire or shipwreck. And I think that's
I think that's pretty much, to say it simply, you have no rights but what can be enforced. And the only thing that you could theoretically say is a right is your right to be left alone. But the only way to do that is if you can enforce that right through defense purposes or through negotiation. So a mediation, institutions, social structures, legalities. And so with that being the case, if that is the case, then realistically, your only right is to defend yourself. And if you really want to constantly defend yourself over and over again, yay, anarchy. Woo!
And a good way to look at this in the Enneagram perspective is, rights are inherent because they're encodified in type 6, the law, right? And so you had to split that down the middle. There's chiefs on one end, which is, the really rigid, type 5. And then you have the Indians on the other, which is, sporadic, chaotic type 7. There's ADHD versus, consistency. And
I would prefer to have some consistency. I would prefer that people, in my opinion, get the fallacy, like libertarians, right? Libertarians and ANCAPs, and like get the fallacy of what you think judges is and what you think your interpretation of what Romans 13 means, and get that out of your brain for real, and understand what Romans 13 is really speaking of, what Paul is really speaking about, and then understand what exactly the society was in the land of Canaan during the days of the judges for the Israelites. Do you really want to do as you please? Like, really? Like, everything is based, like everything that you try to enforce and protect and do, and like it's based in a relative. Like, do you really want moral relativity? Because if you want a moral relative society, which is basically where we're at now, because we are in a state of lawlessness, anarchy, because that's how your government operates. Your government makes laws that infringes upon individuals that are law abiding, putting them in a state of fear and allowing criminals to run wild because they're laws that cannot be enforced. Meanwhile, they enforce laws that are minuscule on the books that they have added as a revenue builder for themselves. So effectively, you have law-abiding citizens caught in between a chaotic anarchical state, let's call it anarcho-tyranny, between a lawless government of a mafia that is extorting you under the threat of duress and violence, and criminals that run amok anyways because nobody is really enforcing anything. And when they do enforce it, it's a little too late. And that's just how society's set up anyways. Like, how can you enforce a crime by preventing it when in reality you can only investigate it and then find who the perpetrator is? That's reality. You want to be in a society that prevents it? You want to live in a totalitarian surveillance state, technocratic, with Neuralinks all over the place and Palantir running everything?
And this kind of feeds into something I was talking about on X a little while ago, comparing the Soviet Union to the United States, right? Both of them, are rigid laws. Both of them have a law structure, right? And Type 6 is really driven by, reducing risk by, creating structures. through the law. That's how they operate. In the
Yeah.
Soviet Union, there were more chiefs than Indians, and so because they were so rigid, they couldn't adapt, and that's why their system failed. In the United States, we're more Indian than chief. You can tell, like back, during the 1990s and stuff like that. Like with Waco, they were talking about how there's only so many police officers here. There's so many Indians. There's so many people. We had to intimidate them so that they stay in line. You can see that in today's society, the cost of that mind frame, and the fact that we have so many prisons, and it costs so much to keep people in prison. Because they're so out of line and they're so chaotic. They're so enthusiastic. They're such party people. Drugs and alcohol and all that and stuff like that. Stuff that really isn't that big a deal in the bigger picture of things.
I mean,
And
it's a
so-
bigger deal. It is a
Well,
bigger deal for your soul,
I'm not-
but yeah, I
it
get what
is.
you're saying.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, they make it more of an issue that they instigate it, and they give momentum to it by reacting to it. But anyways, the way that our system operates is we have to pay more in taxes, which means, yeah, there's the freedom to do things, but the gap between our ability to pay for it and the ability for it to continually to exist is leading us to the same kind of destruction that happened in the Soviet Union. It's just in the opposite direction.
And that's lawlessness.
Yeah,
That's lawlessness creating more lawlessness. That's chaos.
it's a nice idea in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. Either way, it's gonna fail. Type 6 is destined to fail in that way. Is that it's a projection and it doesn't match reality. It's divergence.
Speaking of lawlessness and injustice, and how forces of authorities absent of real authority, and which is justice and mercy in the eyes of God, and truly a picture into the idea of why rights do not actually exist unless you can, defend them and enforce them. And by enforcing them, you're actually going to take someone else's rights away anyways. You have a video there, Andrew, and you said Soviet Union, but I think these guys are more brutal.
Yeah, this is
It
a
ain't
trade-off.
Turkey.
And
Turkey didn't exist.
Well, Turkey now, but Ottoman Empire then.
Well, the Ottoman Empire was beyond just Turkey. Asia Minor, Ionia.
But
should we talk about what they did to the Armenians?
I mean, we can maybe in another episode. It's a little.
Yeah. Let's just put it this way, everybody. The Armenian genocide, though there are certain factions within this world that would deny it, including our greatest ally, the Armenian genocide wasn't just one segment at the end of a declining empire during the most chaotic event to start the 20th century, being World War I. The Armenian genocide was a causal effect of multiple mass murder sprees spanning all the way back to the Middle Ages, because they were Christian. Islam's obscene. What are you checking?
And just to make sure they don't speak. It's been a little while since they don't. I just want to make sure they didn't discuss that in this video.
Oh, if they do, they do. But anyways, let's put this video on.
All right.
Bore everybody with your baldness.
And I mean, it is very, very annoying sometimes being bald like this. So, are we ready?
Let's go.
The year is 1453. Inside the convent of St. Theodosia in Constantinople, 47 nuns kneel in prayer as cannon fire shakes the ancient walls. They've been praying for 72 hours straight. Outside, the greatest siege in medieval history reaches its climax. But these women aren't just praying for salvation, they're preparing for something far worse than death. What happened to them in the next 3 days would be recorded by multiple eyewitnesses, yet their story, and the stories of thousands of Christian nuns across 6 centuries of Ottoman rule, remains one of history's most misunderstood chapters. Not because the evidence doesn't exist, but because the truth is far more complex than anyone wants to admit. See, when empires collide with faith, when conquest meets conviction, the first casualties are always the most vulnerable. And in the Ottoman Empire's 600-year relationship with Christianity, no group was more vulnerable, or more symbolic, than the women who had devoted their lives to God. But here's what makes this story different from every other tale of conquest you've heard. The Ottoman Empire didn't just conquer Christian lands, it absorbed them, it ruled them for centuries. And that means we're not talking about a single moment of violence, we're talking about a system, a structure, a 600-year relationship between Islamic rulers and Christian holy women that shifted, evolved, and yes, sometimes exploded into unimaginable horror. To understand what really happened, we need to start not with the nuns.
That's the sound of an American oil company hard at work. Want to be a part of it? Listen up.
Hello. But with the empire itself. Because the Ottoman Empire wasn't like any other Muslim power in history. By 1453, it had already conquered vast Christian territories across Anatolia and the Balkans. But unlike previous Islamic conquerors, who often forced immediate conversion, the Ottomans had developed something unique, the millet system. Think of it like this. Instead of destroying every church and converting every Christian, the Ottomans essentially said, keep your faith, keep your churches, keep your laws, but pay us for the privilege. Christians became dhimmi, protected peoples. They paid a special tax called jizya, faced legal restrictions, couldn't build new churches without permission, and their testimony in court was worth less than a Muslim's. But, and this is crucial, they could practice their religion. Now you might wonder, where do nuns fit into this system? Christian convents fell under the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate or the Armenian Church, depending on their denomination. These religious authorities, appointed by the Sultan himself, had jurisdiction over Christian religious institutions. In theory, this meant protection. In practice, well, that depended entirely on when and where you lived. Because here's what the simplified histories don't tell you. The Ottoman Empire of 1453 was radically different from the Ottoman Empire of 1853 or 1915. What started as a confident, expanding empire that could afford to be relatively tolerant became, over centuries, a declining power desperately trying to hold itself together. And as that transformation happened, the fate of Christian religious women transformed with it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's return to Constantinople, May 29th, 1453. The city that had stood for over 1,000 years as the center of Christian Byzantine power is about to fall. Sultan Mehmed II, just 21 years old, has besieged the city for 53 days. His massive cannon, designed by a Hungarian engineer named Orban, has been pounding the Theodosian walls that hadn't been breached in 1,000 years. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI leads barely 7,000 defenders against an Ottoman force of up to 100,000. The defenders know what's coming. They've heard the stories from other conquered cities. According to the customs of medieval warfare, customs followed by Christians and Muslims alike, a city that refused to surrender could be looted for 3 days. Everything and everyone inside became the property of the victors. At 1 a.m. on May 29th, the final assault begins. By dawn, Ottoman forces have breached the outer walls. Emperor Constantine XI dies fighting on the ramparts, his body never conclusively identified. And then, as the sun rises over the Bosphorus, Ottoman soldiers pour into the city. Leonard of Chios, an Italian archbishop who was actually there, trapped in the city during the siege, wrote his account just months later. His words, preserved in Latin, are difficult to read even today. The enraged Turkish soldiers gave no quarter. When they had massacred, and there was no longer any resistance, they were intent on pillage, and roamed through the town stealing, disrobing, pillaging, killing, raping, taking captive men, women, children, monks, priests, people of all sorts and conditions. But it's what he writes next that brings us to our specific focus. The nuns left behind, even those who were obviously such, were disgraced with foul debaucheries. Meanwhile, at the convent of St. Theodosia, remember those 47 nuns we mentioned? According to multiple Byzantine sources, they had barricaded themselves in their chapel. When Ottoman soldiers broke through, the nuns were still at prayer. What happened next varies depending on which account you read. Some say they were killed immediately, others suggest a fate worse than death. The Venetian physician Niccolo Barbaro, who kept a detailed diary of the siege, noted that throughout the city, the Turks made a great slaughter of Christians. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, one that shows just how complex Ottoman-Christian relations would become. 3 days after the conquest, Sultan Mehmed II officially entered the city, and what he did next surprised everyone. He immediately issued orders to stop the looting. He went to the Hagia Sophia, yes, but he also summoned the surviving Greek Orthodox clergy. Within weeks, he had appointed a new patriarch, Gennadius Scalarius, and granted him a firman, an imperial decree, guaranteeing the Orthodox Church's right to exist under Ottoman rule. The Sultan even encouraged Christians who had fled to return. He needed them. Constantinople, soon to be Istanbul, needed to be rebuilt, repopulated, revitalized. A dead city was worthless to him. But what about the convents? What about the nuns who survived? This is where we encounter one of history's cruel ironies. The very same sultan who had overseen the 3-day sack that saw nuns violated and killed was now guaranteeing the Orthodox Church's right to maintain convents. New nuns would take vows. New convents would operate, though under very different circumstances than before. You see, under the new Ottoman system, Christian religious institutions faced a constant squeeze. They couldn't ring bells. That was forbidden as it might disturb Muslim prayer. They couldn't expand their buildings without special permission, which was rarely granted. They had to pay heavy taxes, and perhaps most significantly, they existed at the Sultan's pleasure. What he granted, he could take away. For the next 2 centuries, from roughly 1453 to 1650, we enter what historians call the classical period of Ottoman rule. And for Christian nuns, this period was marked by a strange sort of stability. The military system functioned like a series of parallel societies.
When I say their rights,
Muslims lived under Islamic law. Christians lived under their own religious law for personal matters.
But you see what I mean? Rights are a privilege depending on who the beholder is. And the only way to match it is with force and take the rights away from the other side who is doing their bidding to ensure that they have their rights. And so you look at that, I mean, to outlaw the bell ringing, the toll, to not only was the bell a significant point of knowing the time of day you were at, but it was also a significance for Christian prayer as well, especially for like the liturgy of the hours, significance of when mass was to be held, calling everybody to congregate, and to ban that particular privilege of being within Christendom because it disturbs the Islamic prayer. That just goes to show you rights do not exist unless they are enforced upon. And the only way to enforce rights is to infringe upon the so-called rights of another person. That's why you have second class. That's why we live in a society today, in our secular society, where we have the immigration, the migration issue, the illegal immigration issue, that worker. I mean, one side needs it because it reflects their power and their control, because it's cheap labor. And then the other side doesn't, because it's a reflection of them losing their hold. But in all scope of things, the powers that be use certain parameters of enforcement to ensure and incentivize their rights. And if you get in the way,
this kind of reflects, like I said about the Enneagram earlier stuff. Sorry, my signal dropped. This kind of reflects the Enneagram stuff I was talking about before. This is 6.7, the buddy, is that we have, strict rules, but you have your freedom to do this. We can be pals, we can get along kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of feeds, this is like the United States. You have rights, but they're at our expense.
Yeah. Carry on.
You want to get back into it?
Carry on.
Okay.
Marriage, divorce, inheritance, but under Ottoman law for everything else. Jews had their own millet. Even different Christian denominations, Greek Orthodox, Armenian, Catholic, had separate millets. For convents, this meant they were technically under the protection of their patriarch, who was himself under the protection and control of the Sultan. It was protection, but protection with a price. Let me give you a specific example that shows how this worked in practice. In 1540, the convent of Our Lady of Tinos, on the Greek island of Tinos, faced a crisis. Local Ottoman officials were demanding extra taxes beyond what the law required, a practice called bidar. The abbess, whose name history records simply as Martha, couldn't pay. The local officials threatened to convert the convent into a mosque. But here's where the system actually worked as intended. Abbess Martha travelled to Constantinople, a dangerous journey for a Christian nun, and appealed directly to the Patriarch. The Patriarch, in turn, appealed to the Grand Vizier, and surprisingly, the Grand Vizier ruled in the convent's favour. The local officials were reprimanded, the excessive taxes were returned, and the convent continued to operate. This story, documented in Ottoman tax records that survive in the Turkish archives, shows us something important. The system, when it worked, actually did protect Christian religious institutions. But, and this is a massive but, it only worked when the empire was strong, confident, and stable. Because here's what those Ottoman tax records also show us. For every convent like Tinos that successfully appealed for justice, there were others that simply disappeared from the records. One year they're paying taxes, the next year nothing. What happened to them? Were they abandoned as Christian populations declined? Were they seized by local officials? Were their nuns forced to flee? Or worse? The records don't tell us, they just show absence where once there was presence. And this pattern, protection in theory, vulnerability in practice, would define the experience of Christian nuns under Ottoman rule for centuries. When the empire was strong, the protection was real. When the empire was weak, or when local officials were corrupt, or when wars broke out, that protection could evaporate instantly. Which brings us to a period when that protection didn't just evaporate, it turned into something far darker. By the late 1600s, the Ottoman Empire was no longer the confident, expanding power it had been. The failed siege of Vienna in 1683 marked the beginning of a long, slow decline. And as the empire weakened, its relationship with its Christian subjects began to change in fundamental ways. The first sign of trouble came in the form of the Janissaries. Originally, the Janissaries were elite soldiers, taken as children from Christian families through the Devshirme system, converted to Islam, and trained as the Sultan's personal guard. But by the late 1600s, they had become a power unto themselves, corrupt, violent, and increasingly hostile to Christians. In 1703, in what became known as the Edirne event, a group of Janissaries attacked the convent of St. Catherine near Edirne. The surviving records found in the Patriarchate's archives in Istanbul describe how 23 nuns were violated and dispersed. The Patriarch protested to the Sultan. The Sultan issued a stern decree condemning the attack, and nothing happened to the perpetrators. This became the new pattern: attack, protest, decree, no consequences. But why were convents specifically targeted? Think about what a convent represented in this context. These were communities of women living without male protection, often with some wealth from donations and land holdings, and they were symbols of Christianity's continued presence in Islamic lands. In times of tension, they were obvious targets. The 1700s saw this pattern repeat across the empire. The convent of the Transfiguration in Anatolia, destroyed in 1721, its nuns scattered. The convent of St. Marina in the Peloponnese, attacked in 1730, fate of the nuns unknown. The records become a litany of loss. But then, in 1770, something happened that would change everything. The Russo-Turkish War began. Russia, presenting itself as the protector of Orthodox Christians, encouraged Greeks to revolt against Ottoman rule. The revolt failed catastrophically, and the Ottoman response was brutal. On the island of Patmos, home to several historic convents, Ottoman irregulars, not official soldiers but armed groups operating with implicit approval, descended on Christian communities. The convent of St. John, which had operated continuously since the 11th century, was ransacked. According to a letter from a surviving nun named Theodosia to the patriarch, they came at dawn. We had bolted the doors, but they broke through with axes. What they did to Sister Catherine before she died, I cannot write. What they did to the younger sisters who survived, they will never speak of. This letter, preserved in the Patriarchate's archives, is one of the few first-person accounts we have from a nun who survived such an attack. Most survivors never spoke of what happened to them. In a culture where virginity was essential to a nun's spiritual status, rape was not just a physical violation, it was a spiritual destruction. By 1821, the Ottoman Empire faced its greatest internal challenge yet, the Greek War of Independence. And this is where our story takes its darkest turn yet. When the Greeks revolted, Ottoman authorities faced a choice. They could treat this as a political rebellion, punishing the rebels while protecting loyal Christian subjects. Or they could treat it as a religious war with all Christians as potential enemies. They chose the second option. On Easter Sunday, April 22nd, 1821, Patriarch Gregory V was celebrating Easter liturgy in Constantinople when Ottoman soldiers entered the church. They dragged him out in his ceremonial robes and hanged him from the main gate of the Patriarchate. His body was left hanging for 3 days, then thrown into the Bosphorus. If the Patriarch himself wasn't safe, what hope did nuns in remote convents have? On the island of Chios, one of the wealthiest Greek islands, the massacre that followed became one of the most documented atrocities of the 19th century. French diplomat François Pouqueville, who compiled testimonies from survivors, recorded that at the convent of Agia Marcella, 34 nuns were killed, but not before suffering what he delicately called outrages to their persons. But it's the testimony of Sister Magdalene, one of only 3 survivors from that convent, that provides the most detailed account. Speaking to British diplomats in 1822, she described how Ottoman soldiers and Turkish irregulars surrounded the convent on April 11th. The abbess tried to negotiate, offering the convent's treasury in exchange for their lives. The soldiers took the treasury, then they took the nuns. They separated us by age, Sister Magdalene testified. The youngest, those under 25, were taken to the ships. The older sisters were gathered in the courtyard. I survived by hiding in the cistern. I could hear everything, but see nothing. The screaming continued for hours. When I emerged 2 days later, I found 28 bodies in the courtyard. The younger sisters were gone. We never learned their fate. Actually, we do know some of their fates. Ottoman slave markets in Constantinople recorded a surge in Greek virgin slaves in the months following the Chios massacre. The prices, documented in market records, show that young women identified as nuns commanded premium prices, not despite their religious status, but because of it. The violation of Christian holy women was both a practical and symbolic act of domination. The Greek War of Independence lasted until 1829. By its end, hundreds of convents across Greek lands had been destroyed.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, actually. Slavery. That's a hot button issue in our secular culture of revisionist history in today's day and age. Wild, isn't it? But did you know that the Islamic great Satan was one of the earliest to instill chattel?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah. That's the thing when it comes down to it. What about let's talk about the slave issue. Why is there slavery, Andrew?
Well, because, in a lot of ways, it's a shortcut. I think, people could be bought and sold for their own use, and they don't have to, pay the cost of whatever that they're using them for.
But I thought they had human rights.
Allegedly.
Natural human rights. You mean to tell me that even with these natural human rights, they're slaves? Even today, everybody, by the way.
I mean, it's it's really brought on by Obama recently. Ironically, in the Middle East, you can see that with open air slave markets. So yeah,
Oh yeah, in Libya, yeah, Islam's back
yeah,
at it again. Thank you. Not to say that Gaddafi was a good guy, he wasn't. But who is really, right? The fact is there was structure there, and removing him and causing a power vacuum caused these Islamists, and we're not going to call they're fundamentalists. Yes. Are they extreme? To the T of what their religion presents. It opened up a power vacuum and it led to open air slave markets. It's like you're basically giving them back exactly what they've been missing for the last 300 years.
yeah,
That they pretty much lost within the last 150, 200 years. They were dwindling, they were weak because the rest of the world was passing them by because we were innovating in trade. Say what you will, but we were innovating in both trade, in technology, in economies, and they were still trapped in a dark age, a perpetual dark age. So this is what happens when you can't enforce. You have either you don't have the ability to enforce your own rights, or you are so subjugated to the point where there's just no point. So you try
Michael.
to do the best you can to live within that structure.
Michael Malice
Inevitably,
called it out this way. He said, if there's not a competition in speech, there's a competition in violence, and competition in speech is a really good thing in theory, but as you can see here, it doesn't work in practice.
no, no, and speech, or in essence, expression. Well, what does it mean when you have a vast uh, majority that can suppress that expression? Then what do you got? You have this. You end
Yeah.
up getting this. But when you do have that competition, not to say like, is there really free speech, Andrew?
It depends on who you're speaking to.
No. See, there's no free speech. I just removed him. See, I don't have to listen to him. Nobody actually has free speech, but there is what he just presented, what Andrew just presented, that Michael Malice once said. We need competition. So the idea of a competition within that expression can there can be drawbacks, obviously. But that is where you try to peel in a balance within the vacuum of competition within that expression.
Yeah.
Because what if, I mean, if I can't express, but you can, then how am I going to defend myself, even through expression? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But if I can express and you can express, then we can hopefully and effectively balance each other out to the point where we'll just leave each other alone. Or at least that's the hope.
That's the adamant thing. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people would just want one piece and be left alone, but you know, in reality, it's a lot more difficult to achieve and pull off. It
It
takes
is.
a lot of focused effort to
It
have that
is. And that's
neutrality.
but I think there is a general way that we can do that. And I think we have to start thinking smaller rather than larger. We have to start thinking community oriented, gathered from ourselves to our families to our locale within the region. because I don't think it can work on a larger scale,
No.
because empires have come and gone. It's inevitable. A large centralizing force is always going to take a hold of the power vacuum that it has survived, so that it can use the authority that it has gained, that is not true anyways. It's not real authority. But what are you going to do to stop them? Fight them?
Yeah, it's always about waiting them out. But sometimes you can't wait them out because you eventually pass away.
I mean, the funny thing is, I forget what Surat is, but it's in the Quran. Of like one of the major elements, and many of these fundamentalists, they live by it. Fight the unbeliever, fight the polytheist until they're all wiped out, pretty much. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but until they're wiped out.
It's okay. I
That's
paraphrased
what you're
earlier in
looking
the
at.
episode.
Yeah, that's what you're looking at. Like, so do you want to constantly fight, or do you want to try to build mechanisms to where we balance out what is real to what is not? It's good to have structure and consistency, but it's also good to build something in cooperative competition with each other, so that we're balancing each other out, so we don't necessarily have to always be at odds with one another. And I think that's where we need to come back to a local.
Yeah. You want to get back into it real quick?
I think how much time we got? Because we only have 15 minutes on the episode of our episode. So let's jump back in and see what we can analyze from the rest of this.
Yeah. Sorry, my signal dropped. But did you say yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exact number of nuns killed, enslaved, or forced to convert to Islam will never be known. The new Greek state, when it conducted a census of religious institutions in 1833, found that of the 412 convents that had existed in Greek lands before the war, only 148 remained. The others had simply vanished, their buildings destroyed, their communities scattered, their libraries burned, their histories erased. If you thought the story couldn't get worse, the late 19th century would prove you wrong. By the 1890s, the Ottoman Empire was often called the sick man of Europe. It had lost most of its European territories. It was deeply in debt to European powers, and Sultan Abdul Hamid II, paranoid and desperate, increasingly saw the empire's Christian minority as not as subjects to be managed, but as existential threats to be eliminated. The catalyst came in 1894. Armenian revolutionaries, seeking the same independence the Greeks had won, began organizing in eastern Anatolia. The Sultan's response was to unleash what became known as the Hamidian massacres. But these weren't military operations against revolutionaries. These were systematic attacks on entire Christian communities. And once again, convents found themselves particularly vulnerable. The French diplomat Paul Cambon, reporting from the town of Erzurum in November 1895, described what he found at the convent of the Holy Mother.
I got a funny one for y'all. So do a little dance while I look for it there, Andrew.
Check out my chicken tendies.
Based China.
Yep. You know how it goes.
So,
Easy come, easy
let me-
go. Go flowing through the
Since-
air like a swinging a man on a rope.
Since we're on the see, this is a silver lining here, everybody. Perhaps the silver lining of this episode is we're talking about how rights are only by force. So in a sick, debaucherous society, this wouldn't happen. Not to say that I would want to live in China's society, but I mean this kind of might be what we were told America is supposed to be. But in reality, I mean, have you seen what June is like anymore?
I mean, I don't think it's too much to say that it's a justified thing.
I'm just gonna say it. Three. I honestly, I hope this is real. I really do, actually, because this is justice. Even if it is China, 3 convicted child sex offenders executed at China as China signals zero tolerance. We need that. We need this, America. We really, really do. We need justice. In order to understand mercy, you need to live in a society that fulfills justice. And if you're not fulfilling justice, then how do you have mercy? And quite frankly, we could start with the entirety of Washington.
Day of the rope.
I mean, so this is to President Xi Jinping. I support you. I support you, and I want you to send the rope. And at this rate, I honestly don't care. Invade this shithole country. Invade Washington. And do what you got to do.
It is the District of Columbia, and we are property of the District of Columbia. You're technically freeing us.
Technically speaking, yes. And if you really want to, go ahead and give dear leader a phone call. He's a little sad that he's missing out on the action in Iran.
Give him that old college try.
Well,
okay, let's get back to the video before we get pulled off of YouTube.
Like and subscribe, everybody.
But it is a charnel house. In the chapel, we counted 43 bodies, all women, all in religious dress. The altar had been deliberately defiled. The youngest victim appeared to be no more than 14, still clutching her prayer book. The eldest, the abbess we were told, had been crucified against the iconostasis. The survivors, there were 4 who had hidden in the crypt, were in no state to provide testimony. They had not spoken since the attack 5 days prior. What made the Hamidian massacres particularly horrific was their official nature. These weren't rogue soldiers or angry mobs, though both participated. These were organized operations, often beginning with the same pattern. Muslim clerics would declare jihad from the minarets. Crowds would gather, and then, with the participation or deliberate non-intervention of local authorities, the killing would begin. Johannes Lepsius, a German missionary who conducted one of the most thorough contemporary investigations, documented attacks on 17 convents during the 1894 to 1896 period. His report, published in Germany as Armenia and Europe, includes this testimony from Sister Sarah, a survivor from the convent of St. Tripsheim near Van. They came after Friday prayers. First the Kurdish irregulars, then the soldiers, then the mob. Mother Superior tried to invoke the protection laws, showing them our tax receipts, our official recognition from the Patriarchate. The commander tore the documents and said, "There is no law but the sword today. They gave us 1 hour to convert to Islam. When we refused, they began with the youngest sisters. They made us watch. Sister Anna, only 16, lasted 3 hours before she died. By nightfall, I was one of 4 still alive from 37. They left us alive to tell others what happens to those who refuse Islam. The European powers protested. They sent diplomatic notes. They threatened intervention. And Sultan Abdul Hamid II would issue reforms, make promises, and then the massacres would continue in a different province. Between 1894 and 1896, historians estimate between 100,000 and 300,000 Armenian Christians were killed. The number of nuns among them was never officially counted, but based on the number of convents destroyed, at least 43 according to Armenian Patriarchate records, it was certainly in the hundreds, possibly thousands. In 1908, a group of military officers called the Young Turks overthrew Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Initially, Christians celebrated. The Young Turks promised equality, modernization, a constitution that would protect all Ottoman subjects regardless of religion. For a brief moment, it seemed like the nightmare might end. That hope died in 1913 when the most radical faction of the Young Turks, the Committee of Union and Progress Cup, seized power in a coup. Their leaders, Enver Pasha, Talat Pasha and Jamal Pasha, had a different vision for the empire's future, a vision that didn't include Christians. World War I gave them their opportunity. Using the war as cover, claiming that Christians were collaborating with Russia, they launched what historians now recognize as the first modern genocide, the Armenian Genocide of 1915 to 1916. But this wasn't the chaotic violence of previous massacres. This was systematic, bureaucratic,
Welcome.
efficient. The CUP created the special organization Teshkilat Mahsusa, unit specifically tasked with eliminating Christians. They used the telegraph system to
I
coordinate
blame daylight
deportations.
savings time.
They printed standardized forms for confiscating Christian property. They even had a bureaucratic euphemism for murder, deportation to the interior. For Christian nuns, this systematic approach meant something particularly horrific. The CUP didn't just want to kill them, they wanted to erase Armenian Christianity entirely, and that meant forcing nuns to become Muslims, to marry Muslim men, to bear Muslim children. Consul Leslie Davis, the American diplomat in Harput, reported in July 1915. At the convent of St. Catherine here in Harput, the authorities gave the nuns a choice: convert and marry Muslim men or join the deportation caravans. 38 chose deportation. I later found their bodies in a ravine 6 miles from the city. They had been stripped naked, presumably to search for hidden valuables. The specific mutilations inflicted upon them I cannot describe in an official document. But some testimonies are too important to leave vague. Aurora Mardiganian, a survivor who later wrote the memoir Ravished Armenia, described what she witnessed at a convent near Malatya. They crucified the old nuns. The young ones, those they found beautiful, they took for themselves. The Turkish officers chose first, then the Kurdish chiefs, then the soldiers. Those who survived this were sold in the markets. I saw Sister Virgine, who had taught me embroidery, sold for 40 silver pieces. She was 19 years old. The systematic nature of the genocide meant that even conversion often wasn't enough to save Christian women. Armenian-American historian Vahakan Dadrian documented cases where converted nuns were still murdered because, as one Turkish officer explained in a German diplomatic cable, their conversion was not sincere, and their children would remember they were born Christian. By the end of 1916, the Armenian genocide had claimed between 800,000 and 1.2 million lives. The Assyrian Christian community lost over 250,000 people, and beginning in 1914, the Greek Orthodox Christians of Anatolia faced their own systematic extermination, with death tolls reaching up to 750,000 by 1923.
I hate that I can't keep this a secret. I canceled all my food delivery subscriptions and upgraded to Cook Unity, and it's
By 1922, the Ottoman Empire was breathing its last. The Turkish War of Independence, led by Mustafa Kemal, later Ataturk, had successfully resisted the partition of Anatolia. But as Turkish forces reconquered territory, the remaining Christians faced a final wave of violence. The climax came at Smyrna, modern Izmir, in September 1922. Smyrna was a cosmopolitan city, roughly half Christian, and home to numerous religious institutions including 7 active convents. When Turkish forces entered the city on September 9th, Christian residents initially hoped for protection. The Turkish commander Nuruddin Pasha had promised safety for non-combatants. That promise lasted less than 24 hours. On September 10th, Turkish soldiers and irregulars began systematic looting of Christian quarters. By September 11th, the killing had begun. By September 13th, the Armenian quarter was in flames. The fire spread to the Greek and European quarters. The Turkish and Jewish quarters mysteriously remained untouched. George Horton, the American consul general, provided one of the most detailed accounts of what happened at the city's convents. At the convent of St. Fotini, I personally saw the results of what had occurred. 21 nuns, ranging in age from novices of 17 to the elderly abbess, who must have been 70, lay dead in the courtyard. All had been shot, but the evidence of what had been done to them before death was unmistakable. Their habits had been torn open. Some had been mutilated in ways that specifically targeted their religious vows of chastity. But perhaps the most haunting account comes from a Turkish source. Fali Rıfkı Atay, a Turkish journalist and later close associate of Ataturk, wrote in his memoir, "I saw a nun, her habit still marking her as such, throw herself from a burning building rather than face what the soldiers below intended. She fell 4 stories to her death. The soldiers laughed. The fire burned for 4 days. The number of Christians killed in Smyrna is disputed. Estimates range from 10,000 to 100,000. The convents, churches, and Christian schools were deliberately targeted and destroyed. By September 17th, when the last flames died out, centuries of Christian presence in one of Asia Minor's greatest cities had ended. In the aftermath of these horrors, what happened to the survivors? This is perhaps the least told part of the story, because it involves a different kind of tragedy, the tragedy of silence. Many nuns who survived the genocides and massacres never spoke of what they had endured. In Armenian survivor communities in France, the United States and South America, these women often lived on the margins, unable to return to religious life because of what had been done to them, unable to integrate into secular life because of what they had been. Maria Jakobsen, a Danish missionary who ran an orphanage in Lebanon for Armenian genocide survivors, recorded in her diary the case of Sister Aghavni. She arrived at our orphanage in 1923, still wearing the remnants of her religious habit. She had been a nun at the convent of the Holy Translators in Sivas. Of the 40 nuns in her convent, she was the only survivor. For 3 years, she had been passed between Turkish and Kurdish households as a slave. She never spoke of those years, but she would wake screaming in the night. She died in 1925, officially of tuberculosis, but I believe she died of a broken soul. The systematic nature of the violence against nuns created a particular form of collective trauma. These weren't random acts of violence. They were deliberate attempts to destroy the spiritual heart of Christian communities. A violated nun represented not just an individual tragedy, but a communal catastrophe, a breaking of the sacred that could never be fully healed. Some survivors did testify, particularly during the post-war trials in Constantinople, in 1919 to 1920. Sister Hypsime Darbinian, who survived the deportations from Erzurum, testified, "They knew who we were. Our habits made us visible. That was the point. They wanted everyone to see that even God could not protect us." When they did what they did to Mother
Andrew
Superior
says
in
bye,
the town square,
William.
making all Christians watch, the message was clear. Your faith is
Yeah.
powerless against our will. But most survivors remained silent. In a 1955 oral history project conducted by Armenian American scholars, they found that of the 500 genocide survivors interviewed, fewer than a dozen were willing to discuss sexual violence, and none would allow their names to be used. The shame, even 40 years later, was too great. The final chapter of this story isn't one of violence, but of erasure. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed in 1923, included a population exchange between Greece and Turkey. Over 1 million Greek Orthodox Christians were forced to leave Anatolia, their home for over 2 millennia. Among them were the last remaining nuns from the few convents that had somehow survived. The convent of Panagia Soumela, perched high in the mountains above Trabzon, had operated continuously since 386 AD. It had survived Seljuk invasions, the conquest of Trabzon, centuries of Ottoman rule and even the genocides, but it couldn't survive Lausanne. In August 1923, the last 17 nuns descended the mountain path for the final time. They carried with them what sacred objects they could hide. The ancient icon of the Virgin Mary, said to have been painted by St. Luke himself, was buried in a secret location, only retrieved and smuggled out years later. Sister Macrina, one of those last nuns, later wrote from Greece, "We left behind more than buildings. We left behind 15 centuries of prayers soaked into those stones. Every morning since the 4th century, nuns had sung the dawn hymns in that chapel. That chain, unbroken for over 1,000 years, we were forced to break. That, more than anything else they did to us, felt like defeat." The population exchange was presented as a humanitarian solution, a way to prevent future massacres by creating homogeneous nation-states. But for the Christian communities of Anatolia, it was the final erasure. The Turkish Republic that emerged would be 99% Muslim. The Christians who had been there since the time of St. Paul were gone. But here's something the official histories often miss. Not everyone left. Not everyone died. Throughout Anatolia, there remained what Turks call hidden Armenians. Christians who had survived by converting to Islam, at least publicly. Among them were former nuns who had been forcibly married to Muslim men. These women lived double lives. In public, they were Muslim wives and mothers. In private, some maintained their Christian faith, teaching their children Armenian prayers in whispers, keeping hidden icons, secretly baptizing their babies with saved holy water. Fethiye Çetin's groundbreaking book, My Grandmother, revealed this hidden history when she discovered that her own Turkish Muslim grandmother was actually an Armenian Christian survivor. Her grandmother, Seher, had been Heranush Gadarian, taken from a death march at age 9. But Setin's research revealed something more. Her grandmother had been educated in a convent school and likely would have become a nun herself had the genocide not intervened. In the 2000s, as Turkey began to slightly open discussion of the genocide, more of these hidden stories emerged. In 2014, a woman in Diyarbakir revealed that her grandmother had been Sister Mariam from the convent of St. Sarkis. Forced to marry a Turkish officer at age 15, she had lived as Fatima for 70 years, but had secretly maintained her vows, never consummating the marriage after bearing one child, praying the Christian offices in silence every day until her death in 1987. How many such women were there? We'll never know. The silence was too complete, the fear too deep, the shame too overwhelming. Today, in what was once the heartland of Eastern Christianity, only a handful of functioning convents remain in Turkey. The convent of the Virgin Mary in Mardin still has 4 nuns. The monastery of Mor Gabriel, dating to 397 AD, maintains a small community. In Istanbul, a few Greek Orthodox convents continue, shadows of their former selves. But the physical absence of convents across Anatolia speaks louder than any historical account. In the city of Ani, once known as the City of 1001 Churches, the ruins stand empty. The convent of Kusanats, which housed a famous scriptorium where nuns illuminated manuscripts, is now roofless, its frescoes fading. Shepherd boys use the chapel as a shelter for their flocks. The Turkish state's relationship with this history remains complicated. The Armenian genocide is still officially denied, referred to as the events of 1915, or blamed on mutual violence. School textbooks don't mention the convents that once dotted Anatolia or the nuns who lived in them. The systematic sexual violence against Christian women is completely absent from official histories. Yet paradoxically, the Turkish government has recently begun restoring some Christian sites, not as living religious spaces but as tourist attractions. The convent of Akdamar, on an island in Lake Van, was restored in 2007, but it's a museum, not a convent. No nuns will ever again sing the morning prayers there. The restoration preserves the building while erasing its purpose, a perfect metaphor for how modern Turkey deals with its Christian past. So what really happened to Christian nuns under Ottoman rule? The answer changes dramatically depending on when and where we look. For much of Ottoman history, roughly from 1453 to 1850, convents operated under the millet system with relative stability. Yes, they faced discrimination, heavy taxation, and occasional local violence. But the system generally functioned. Convents survived, even occasionally thrived. The greatest threats were economic pressure and gradual demographic decline, not systematic violence. But from the 1850s onward, and especially from 1894 to 1923, Christian nuns faced increasingly systematic violence that culminated in genocide. During this period, hundreds of convents were destroyed, thousands of nuns were killed, enslaved, or forced to convert. The violence wasn't random or accidental. It was deliberate, often state-sanctioned, and specifically targeted religious women as symbols of Christian presence. The documented evidence from diplomatic archives, survivor testimonies, Ottoman records, and contemporary accounts proves beyond doubt that massive atrocities occurred. The Hamidian massacres, the Armenian genocide, the Greek and Assyrian genocides, these happened. They're not myths or exaggerations. The systematic use of sexual violence as a weapon of genocide is extensively documented. What the evidence doesn't support is the idea that such systematic violence was constant throughout Ottoman history, or that there was some empire-wide policy specifically targeting nuns for 600 years. The reality is more complex. Long periods of difficult but sustainable coexistence, punctuated by explosions of extreme violence, culminating in genocide. Perhaps the last word should go to Sister Sepuhi Mushian, one of the last survivors of the genocide era, who died in 1998 at age 102.
Whoa.
What's that?
I just built a budgeting app in Base 44.
Guys,
In a 1995 interview, she said,
And that
"People
is
always want to know what
wow.
they did to us."
We can end it there, Andrew.
It's got 3 minutes
Nah.
left.
No, that 3 minutes, I think we can end it. That's heartbreaking enough. But we need to find
It
the
is.
silver lining in it quick before anything. Too much pain and suffering has been caused over religion across the centuries. People believe what they believe. Leave them to believe in peace. Be peaceful, whatever your faith. I'll have to disagree to agree to disagree on that one. I don't think it's effectively religion. I think it's a lot to do with political regimes and structuring outside of our own capacity towards whatever we think in a relative voice of our own of what is right and what is wrong. I don't think we live in an objective reality. If we did, then I think the world would be peaceful because I think everybody knows don't steal, don't hurt each other, don't murder, don't rape. I mean, big four right there. Um, and to be brutally honest, I mean, I'm going to be a little judgmental on Islam, but this is what Islam is. Islam is more political than religious, anyways. So, but I
If
do
you
agree that when you don't seek the fullness of truth, then you're going to act outside of your purview of your faith. You're not going to actually live within it. So, his people's interpretation of their faith and politics getting involved too. Relativism. Relativism.
if if you want to filter this through the Enneagram personality, yeah, you would probably pull this with type 3 with a 4 wing. Type 3 is focused on success at all cost, prestige, but also fraud is the downfall of type 3. And then type 4
Mm,
is authenticity, originality, uniqueness, uh, hatred, shame, anger. Uh,
mm.
so that you can see this kind of plays out over no matter what government's in power, is their worth and value as government is that they pull. You can see this in the Soviet Union, like I was talking about before, is the Great Terrors, right? And you saw this, in China, and you see this in North Korea. Uh, it's it's a it's a fascinating framework to understand the world if you know how
Yes.
to look at.
Yeah. Yes, Andrew. And I do agree. Muhammad is a false prophet.
Oh yes, but
So I do like my life, and if I disappear tonight, everybody, it wasn't because of me.
he did not uninstall himself.exe.
Mm. Yes. There are different faiths, and there's an inkling of truth in every single one of them. That is my perspective as well, and that is also my church's teachings. There's an inkling of truth in everything. What is the fullness? I like to say the mystery of my faith. So
Oh,
any silver linings there that you can pick? No negative there, Andrew.
well, the only really silver lining I can pull out of this is from the Enneagram perspective is at least if we understand and recognize this, we can use it as to our advantage to try to build a better society and understand what we're working with.
So by a psychological point, perhaps if we can understand what's ticking inside one's mind, we could figure this out. How do we go along with that? How do we do that?
Well, I know I've seen on X before we talked about, ways like over in Europe, ways to fix how like the United Kingdom is falling apart. And you can
Hmm.
use the Enneagram in this way is that if you can pack the courts with lawsuits and stuff like that, you can force a capitulation because if you're appealing to the law, you're either going to have a system where it becomes out of date because it can't be sustained, or it's such a significant divergence that it eventually capitulates and a correction comes into place. So you could use that as a guiding light to understand how we can make progress in a successful way in our society today. Katie has a.
But with but with contrite heart and humble spirit, let us be received. That's from your favorite book there, Andrew. Favorite prophet.
I see.
Can you guess who it is? It starts with
Please
a D.
enlighten me. Please.
You're a fan of Daniel, right?
I'm not sure he mean, but
You're a fan of Daniel, right?
the Muslim skeptic guy.
The Muslim skeptic guy. Nah, bro.
I don't know.
The book of Daniel.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. But
we're
with
talking about Islam,
heart,
so
yeah. No, but with contrite heart and humble spirit, let us be received. Daniel 3, verse 39. Let that settle in for you. The only silver lining I see is that from history, we can learn about what not to do now and in the future. Yes! History likes to rhyme. It's kind of funny like that. And the problem is we allow it to continue to rhyme. It doesn't repeat because things are different. I mean, we can't completely mimic what goes on in the past, but what we can do is continue to go through the same cycle after the same cycle. So if we actually look to history and pull from the past, but don't live inside the past, we can actually learn something and learn not to make the same mistakes again and again and again like we have been. And we still are. We're still making the same mistakes. But
unfortunately.
But I think that's a good spot to end. So any thoughts or prayers that you would like to call out, Andrew?
I just encourage people, if you really found that moving like I did, and I'm sure Zach did, pray for those people and their souls.
Pray for their souls. Every last one of them. I'll never stop praying for people. Pray for their souls. Pray for everybody who is no longer here on this earth, and pray for everybody on this earth. We're all one body, one communion, one community. So, and Katie is sending you very, very much healing there, Andrew. Any bad things going on in your head right now, in your heart?
Try not to let those things bother me. No.
I don't know. Something tells me Katie sees something. But anyways, anything else, Andrew?
No, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you on Blockchain Roundtable tomorrow, 11 Eastern, 10 Central. It'll be a good episode, like always. So
on the Dragon Chain YouTube channel, as well as the Legacy Ride, as well as Litecoin Lisa and Satoshi Sean if he's not late, and he can get prepared. See there. Like and subscribe all of those channels, by the way, everybody. And with that, let's take it away. Andrew, I'll let you end.
Thanks for watching, guys. See you later.
Bitcoin, baby.
Hey, yeah, this is Bitcoin. I'm back. The king of the rap shit. I'm back in this Bitcoin, baby. I'm back in this bitch. Flossing fast cars and rolling with my clique. The king of the rap shit, the real OG. Whack ass rappers got nothing on me. Bought another Lambo, 3 hoes inside it, 10 hoes in line, ready to ride it. It's Bitcoin, bitch. Keep the track bumping. Really on the plug. I got pies in the oven. 80 years old, and your baby mama fond of me. All she wanna do is smoke my broccoli. Private jets from Rome to Ibiza. Lisa, Jenny, Julie, and Maria. Every day I gotta give thanks. I got Bitcoins in the bank. Bitcoin, baby. I'm back in this bitch.
Bitcoin, baby.
The dopest and the illest.
Oh.
I'm a bad motherfucker.
Bitcoin, baby.
The king of the rap shit. I'm back in this bitch. Axe your grandmother. Verse 2, coming with the gin and the juice. Call me a dragon. Spit flame in the boot. I'm hot, like a thermos full of coffee. So hot, can't get the hose off me. It's true. I got the weed card and shit. I'm smoking like a motherfucking chimney, kid. Bitches love me. My shit's never whack. Tell these motherfuckers Bitcoin's back.
Bitcoin, baby.
I'm a bad motherfucker.
Hot like hot coffee. Oh.
Axe your grandmother.
Surprise, motherfucker.
The king of the rap shit. I'm back in this bitch.
Get your hands in the air. Put your hands on the car. Put your 2 hands on the rock. Put your 2 hands on the rock.
Bitcoin, baby.